Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
It is indeed Ask Rob and Rob, where you get in touch, you wonderful people, ask us wonderful questions, and two guys called Rob answer them. Simple. That's what we do each and every week on every single Tuesday, and this week is no different. And we make it very, very simple for you to get involved. You have two options, and Rob, would you like to give them?
With pleasure. So the first option is to give us a call, 013 808 00035. So that's 013 808 00035. Normal rates apply. You can leave us a voicemail there, or you can go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast, and you can leave us a message over the internet that way. Whichever way you choose doesn't matter. All that matters is that you ask us an excellent question. And that is precisely what Bjorn has done this week.
Hey guys, this is Bjorn calling from London. First off, thanks hugely for your fine work in the property educational sphere. I'm a big fan of the podcast, the magazine, and Rob D's books. My question really is about asset allocation. Generally, when you speak to financial advisors, wealth managers and the like, they recommend only having about 10 to 15% of your investable assets in property, and thus the majority in equities and bonds. I myself have already broken this rule, I guess, by having around 50% of my assets in property and the other 50% in stocks and shares. But I have to say, given the volatility of the stock market and the terrible returns on cash and bonds, thanks to this long era of low interest rates that we're in, I am seriously tempted to invest more in bricks and mortar, despite, all the tax and general legislation changes. So I'm, of course, not asking you to whether you think it's a good idea per se, but unless, of course, you want to put a disclaimer at the end of the recording. But what would be interesting to know is the view of major property investors such as your good selves as to what degree you feel one's investable assets should be split percentage-wise. Many thanks and keep up the great work, gents.
Thank you, Bjorn. Great question. And one that crops up quite a lot, actually, because you hear different numbers, different percentages given, but not from all IFAs or financial advisors, I might add. You've got some great ones out there. But occasionally you get this advice that you should be quite limited in what you should invest in property and have the majority in bonds or stocks. Now, this is where I used to probably get frustrated, but now it gives me amusement that financial advisors that make money from putting you into things like stocks and bonds aren't big fans of property. The most funny part of it is when they get called independent, because they really aren't. They are monetized and incentivized to put you into those types of investments. Now, that doesn't make them bad people, but we just need to understand what's at play here. Equally, you're listening to a property-related podcast. So guess what? We're going to be pro-property, but at least we're honest about it. So that's the first thing you need to take into consideration. Once we get past that, though, what should you do? Well, it's what you get comfortable with. The reason why I invest in property, and the vast majority of my wealth is in property, is because I find it simple to understand. I know what a property is. I know roughly what prices will do over time. I'm in it for the long term. I'm not going to try and get rich quickly. And if I am sensible, don't over leverage, and just sit and wait, I'll do well. Now, there are people who get burnt in property, of course they do, and they often make really poor decisions, or they're in it for the get rich quick side of things. But if you're in it for the long term, if it's for your financial future, you should be. Property can be a wonderful asset. The other thing is, though, even if you don't intend to get into property in a big way, because of leverage, quite quickly, the percentage of your wealth that is allocated to property becomes a big number. So if you're in property, you tend to get into it a big way, whether you like it or not, just because of the leverage effect. So my advice would be, listen to everyone, take advice from people like ourselves who are very pro-property, speak to people who are not so pro-property, and then draw your own conclusions and make your own mind up. We're always going to give you our own experiences. That's what people who are advisors, experts do. They often base it on their own experiences, and that's fine, but you need to do what's right for you. Look at your own goals, look at your own tolerance to risk, and then decide what's best.
This is going to shock you, Rob, but I do not disagree with you. I think that is absolutely right. We are biased, but then so is everyone else. So the key is to listen to everyone, take their own bias into account. The key is to spot the incentives because everyone has them. So spot them and then decide what you want to do. I think there's a lot to be said for diversification, but then I wouldn't worry too much about slavishly sticking to a rule like 10 to 15% in property or anything like that. There's a couple of things that I'd add. Firstly, you can have a lot of control over your property fortunes by knowing what you're doing and by getting diversification between geographic areas and types of property as well. I'm not saying that you're going to be able to, if you do all the research in the world and you put together the perfect spreadsheet, you're going to get the perfect investment that's never going to cause you any problems, never going to fall in value. That's not going to happen. But what I'm saying is there's a world of difference between buying property intelligently because it's a subject that you know a lot about and you've researched it versus just piling into property because you read in the paper it's the thing to do at the moment. So investing in property is not just one thing. There are lots of different ways of approaching it, and you can do it well or you can do it badly. The other thing that you've got to think about as well is what you're ultimately looking to property for and what you want to achieve. Another thing that I really like about property, apart from the benefit of leverage, which Rob's already mentioned, is that if you make sure that your portfolio is relatively recession-proof, so you don't buy too much at the peak, you see it coming, you're not over-leveraged and all that kind of thing, then your income stream is going to be relatively consistent. Whatever happens in terms of the market crashing and all the rest of it, people are still going to want to rent your property. So I think that's a big advantage as well. So even though you can say property is risky because, it does crash at some point, it does go down. Well, yeah, it does. But then so does the stock market. And if everything's going to crash at the same time, which it normally does, the stock market goes first and the property market follows a little bit later, then all else being equal, I'd be quite happy to own property where it's not going to fall to nothing and your income stream is going to be relatively solid as long as your portfolio is structured in the right way. But that's just me exercising my bias once again. This is a property-related podcast, so you will hear a lot about that. To give the other point of view, you could say that, well, with property, you do really need to know what you're doing. Whereas if you just buy a globally diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, you're not going to win big, but you're not going to lose big either. So is that an answer? Not really, but hopefully there's something interesting in there.
But we have tried to offer some balance on the podcast. We had the wonderful Pete Matthew over from Meaningful Money recently. So make sure you check out his episodes where he tried to give a little bit of balance to our obvious bias. But it's important, as Rob said, to understand everyone's biases so you can make informed decisions. Well, we hope that you make a great decision by joining us again on Thursday. And of course, we'll be back next week with Ask Rob and Rob. But until then, have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.